The space station Titanus was a massive floating hub of activity, nestled in the heart of the galactic trade routes. It was the kind of place where traders, mercenaries, and explorers all crossed paths, sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose. But for the crew of the Tempest, it had been nothing more than a pit stop, a quick refuel and rest before their next big job. Little did they know, their entire perception of the galaxy was about to change. Captain Elric Voss, the leader of the Tempest, sat in the dimly lit command room, a cup of cold, stale coffee in his hand. His eyes were fixed on the flickering holographic display in front of him, which showed a list of potential contracts. Most of them were the usual types: assassination, retrieval missions, and the occasional high-risk bounty. Elric leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his short, graying hair. He was getting tired of the same routine. Nothing ever changed in this line of work. That's when the message came through. It was an encrypted communication, the kind that could only come from a high-ranking source. A voice cut through the static, its tone urgent but strangely calm. "Captain Voss," the voice said, "we have a job for you." Elric raised an eyebrow. "And what's the catch?" he muttered under his breath, knowing all too well that nothing came without a price in this business. The voice continued, "We need you to retrieve an artifact. The location is a remote system on the edge of the galaxy. You'll find it on a planet called Irindor. The coordinates are attached. There's a sizable payout for this job, more than enough to retire comfortably." Elric's curiosity was piqued. It wasn't often that someone came with such an enticing offer, especially for a simple retrieval mission. Most jobs were dirty, dangerous, and usually involved some sort of backstabbing. But this sounded almost too good to be true. "Who's the client?" Elric asked, his eyes narrowing. "That's classified," the voice replied curtly. "Just know that this is a priority. There are others interested in this artifact, and they will stop at nothing to get it. You'll be well compensated for the risks." "Do we have a deal?" Elric hesitated. It was rare that mercenaries like him got paid to retrieve something of this significance. Usually, the jobs they took were about collecting debts, protecting cargo, or hunting down dangerous individuals. But an artifact. What was so important about it that it warranted such secrecy? "Yeah, we have a deal," he finally said, leaning forward and tapping a button on the console to accept the contract. The terms appeared on the screen, and the credits were transferred immediately to his account. A sizable sum, to be sure, but there was still something that gnawed at the back of his mind. Something didn't feel right. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Elric alone with his thoughts. He took a long sip from his cup, his mind racing with possibilities. The Tempest was small compared to some of the bigger mercenary ships that roamed the galaxy, but it was fast, efficient, and well-armed. He had a solid crew: Juno, the sharpshooting engineer; Kale, the former soldier-turned-expert hacker; and Ilara, the navigator with a reputation for knowing the most obscure back channels in the galaxy. They could handle whatever came their way. But still, the nagging feeling wouldn't leave him. Why had they been chosen for this job? There were plenty of other Mercs out there, ones with more experience, more firepower. It was almost as if the client had specifically targeted the Tempest for some reason. Elric shook his head, trying to push the thought away. He stood up and made his way to the bridge, where the rest of the crew would be waiting. As he entered, he saw Juno leaning over a console, her fingers moving quickly across the controls, her eyes focused on the screen. Kale was seated in the corner, tapping away at his tablet, while Ilara stood by the viewport, staring out into the blackness of space. "All right, crew," Elric said, his voice calm but with an edge of excitement. "We've got a job. A retrieval mission. The client wants us to pick up an artifact from a planet called Irindor." Juno turned around, raising an eyebrow. "Irindor? That's in the Outer Rim, right? Not exactly a hotspot for vacationers." "Yeah," Elric replied. "The coordinates are right here." He flicked his wrist, and a holographic map of the galaxy appeared in front of them. He pointed to a remote system on the edge of known space. It's out there, on the far edge of the galaxy. Not much on record about the planet itself, except for a few old archaeological surveys. Looks like it was once home to some sort of ancient civilization. Ilara turned from the viewport and stepped forward, her arms crossed. "Why do I feel like I've heard about this place before?" she muttered, her brow furrowing. "It's probably nothing," Alaric said, brushing it off. "The client says they'll pay handsomely for the retrieval. No strings attached. Just get the artifact and get out. And the coordinates are confirmed. We should be in and out in no time." Kale, who had been quiet up until now, finally looked up from his tablet. "You really think it's going to be that simple?" His tone was laced with skepticism. "A simple retrieval mission. That's not usually how it goes. And I don't trust the fact that the client won't even give us a name." Alaric nodded slowly. "I'm with you on that. Something about this feels off. But it's a big payday, and we could use the work. Let's not overthink it. We'll take the job, but we'll be careful. No one's going to pull anything on the Tempest." The crew exchanged uneasy looks but said nothing. They all knew the dangers of the job. They'd all been mercenaries long enough to understand that nothing in this line of work was ever as easy as it seemed. Alaric turned back to the map, adjusting the coordinates. "All right, gear up. We leave in an hour. Get everything ready for a long jump. We don't know what's waiting for us on Arinder, but we'll be ready." As the crew dispersed, Alaric lingered for a moment, staring at the map. A remote planet on the edge of space, an ancient artifact, and a client who refused to reveal their identity. It didn't sit right with him. He'd been in this business long enough to know that things that felt too easy were often the most dangerous. But there was nothing else to do now. The job was set. They were committed. The only question was, what was waiting for them on Arinder? The Tempest roared to life as it engaged its hyperdrive, streaking across the vast emptiness of space. The crew was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts as the ship surged forward at faster-than-light speeds. Alaric sat in the captain's chair, his fingers drumming nervously on the armrest, his mind racing. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was a sharp contrast to the tension in the air. It wasn't just the strange job that had his nerves on edge. It was the eerie feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. The sense that something was hiding, something important that they hadn't been told. Ilara stood at the viewport, watching the stars blur into streaks of light as they tore through the fabric of space. "I don't like this," she muttered, barely audible over the hum of the ship. "There's something wrong about this job, Alaric." Alaric turned in his seat, meeting her eyes in the reflection of the glass. "I know. It's too quiet. No one's come forward to claim the artifact. Why did they go through all this trouble to get us? And why are we the only ones doing this job?" His voice trailed off as he ran a hand through his hair again. "You think it's a trap?" Juno asked from behind him, her voice sharp but steady. She had finished checking over the ship's weapons systems and was now sorting through the crew's supplies. "Could be. The galaxy's full of people trying to set Mercs up for a fall. It's happened before." "We'll be careful," Alaric responded, his voice hardening. "If anyone tries anything, we'll deal with it. We've got this far by watching each other's backs." Kale, who had been unusually quiet for most of the journey, finally spoke up. "The client's information checks out. The coordinates are real, and we've got an easy jump to Arinder. But," he paused, his eyes scanning the console, "there's nothing on record about the planet. Not a single galactic survey or any serious scientific data. No one's even bothered to map the surface." "That's strange," Ilara muttered, turning from the viewport to look at Kale. "I mean, it's not like uncharted planets don't exist, but for a place this big, it's odd there's no record. Not even from the explorers." "Exactly," Kale said, his voice low. "It's like someone went out of their way to scrub it clean from all the logs, almost like they didn't want anyone to find it. Which makes no sense if it's just a regular retrieval job," Juno added, crossing her arms. Who would bother going to all that trouble just for an artifact? Alaric looked around the room at his crew, the people he trusted more than anyone in the galaxy. His mind churned with the possibilities. There was definitely something about this mission that didn't sit right. And it wasn't just the secrecy. There was something deeper, something dangerous. "We'll find out soon enough," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We'll be landing in a couple of hours. Get ready for anything." The next few hours passed in tense silence as the Tempest neared the Arinder system. The ship decelerated out of hyperspace, and the stars slowed their streaking motion, returning to their usual points of light in the black void of space. In front of them, a small gray planet loomed. It looked unremarkable at first glance. Dusty, barren, with no sign of life or civilization. "Approaching atmosphere," Ilara called from the navigation station. "No signs of interference or other ships in orbit. Looks like we're alone." Alaric glanced over at her. "Keep it that way. We don't want any surprises. Juno, check our comms. I don't want anyone intercepting us." Juno nodded and quickly set to work, her fingers flying over the console, ensuring the ship's communication systems were locked down tight. "All clear," she reported a moment later. "We're not broadcasting any signals. Nothing's coming in either." Alaric stood up from his chair. "Good. Kale, make sure the landing gear's prepped. We don't know what kind of conditions we're walking into down there." Kale nodded, his expression still serious. "I've already got the landing sequence set. We'll be on the ground in a few minutes." The crew fell into their usual routine, preparing for the landing. But the atmosphere in the ship was heavy with suspicion. Every member of the crew knew something was off, but none of them could put their finger on what it was. The Tempest descended into the planet's atmosphere, passing through thin clouds that created eerie shadows over the barren surface below. As the ship made its final approach, the crew could see the outline of a large ancient structure rising from the ground, a sprawling ruin that seemed to stretch for miles. Its architecture was unlike anything any of them had ever seen, smooth, organic lines that seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if the structure had once been alive. "We're landing near the ruins," Alaric said, his voice low and serious. "Stay sharp. We don't know what we're walking into." The landing gear touched down with a low thud, and the Tempest settled onto the rocky ground. The air outside was dry and thin, the temperature cold. The crew moved quickly to suit up, donning their tactical gear and preparing their weapons. They weren't expecting trouble, but they knew better than to be unprepared. Alaric led the way down the ship's ramp, his boots crunching on the dry ground as he took in the landscape around them. The ruins were vast, stretching in all directions, their twisted alien shapes jutting out from the ground like the bones of some ancient creature. The sky above them was a dull gray, the sun dim and distant. "This place gives me the creeps," Juno muttered, her voice muffled by her helmet. "I don't like it." "We're here for the artifact," Alaric reminded her, trying to push down the unease that was creeping up on him as well. "Stay focused. We're in and out. Grab the artifact, get back to the ship, and get paid." They moved cautiously through the ruins, the sounds of their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The walls of the ancient structures were covered in strange symbols and carvings, some of them glowing faintly, as if the planet itself was trying to communicate with them. The further they went, the more intense the feeling of being watched grew, like unseen eyes were following their every move. Alaric could feel the tension building in the air. Something was waiting for them. Something ancient. Something powerful. And the closer they got to the heart of the ruins, the more he couldn't shake the feeling that they had made a mistake, coming here, taking this job, trusting that everything would go smoothly. But there was no turning back now. They had come too far, and they would get the artifact, whatever the cost. As the crew ventured deeper into the ruins, the air seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive. The distant hum of the Tempest's engines was replaced by the quiet buzz of unseen forces, a constant reminder that they were not alone. Each step they took seemed to echo across the vast emptiness of the ancient city, and with each new corner they turned, the oppressive silence weighed heavier on them. The walls, once beautiful and vibrant with strange alien markings, now appeared weathered, cracked by time, and the elements. "Stay sharp," Alaric ordered, his voice low and tense. "Keep your eyes open for any signs of movement. We don't know what's out here." Juno was the first to notice something. Her hand shot up, signaling the others to stop. She pointed toward a large stone archway at the far end of the passage. Carved into the stone was a symbol, an intricate, spiral pattern that seemed to shimmer faintly as though it were alive. Juno's eyes narrowed. "That's the same symbol from the client's files. This has to be it." Alaric moved forward cautiously, his boots crunching against the sand-covered stone as he examined the symbol more closely. It was the only thing that seemed remotely familiar in this alien landscape. Everything else, from the shape of the buildings to the bizarre, organic carvings, was like nothing he had ever seen before. It was as if this planet, this entire civilization, had existed outside of any known history. "Looks like we've found the entrance," Alaric said, his voice steady, but carrying a note of excitement. "Let's move." Cale, as always, was already scanning the surroundings with a watchful eye. His fingers hovered over the controls of his tablet, continuously flicking through various readouts and diagnostics, trying to get a read on the environment. "Something's off," he muttered, his eyes flicking from his screen to the vast chamber ahead of them. "I'm picking up unusual energy readings from beneath the surface. We might not be the only ones here." Juno chuckled, though it was more out of nerves than humor. "Of course we're not. There's no way a place like this could be completely empty." As they entered the chamber beyond the archway, the oppressive silence intensified. The structure before them stretched upward, its high ceiling lost in shadow, with pillars that seemed to pulse faintly with energy. The air was thick with the scent of dust and aged stone, but there was also something else, something strange and metallic, as if the very fabric of the air itself was charged with an unseen force. Alaric's hand instinctively went to his blaster. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Keep moving," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We're close." The crew moved through the labyrinthine corridors, following the strange glowing symbols that seemed to guide their path, leading them toward the heart of the ruins. The further they went, the more unsettling the feeling grew. The walls began to close in, and the light from their helmets flickered erratically, as if the very structure was alive, pulsing with ancient energy. There was an eerie hum in the air now, like the planet itself was awakening to their presence. Cale suddenly stopped dead in his tracks, his expression one of confusion. "This is strange. I've never seen anything like this before. It's almost as if the power source is feeding off us, reacting to our movements." "What do you mean?" Alaric asked, turning toward him, his brows furrowed. Cale looked up from his tablet, his face pale. "The energy readings, they're spiking every time we take a step forward, almost like it's trying to communicate with us. Or—" He broke off, his gaze drifting toward a darkened corner of the room, where the faintest outline of a shape seemed to shift. The group froze. A figure stepped out from the shadows. It was humanoid, but its proportions were all wrong. It had long, thin arms and legs, its body covered in smooth, metallic-like skin that shimmered with an otherworldly glow. Its face was hidden by a featureless mask, but its eyes, or what might have been eyes, glowed faintly from within the hollow, like twin suns. The figure didn't move, but the air around it seemed to crackle with energy. It was as though the very atmosphere had become charged with static. "Who are you?" Alaric asked, his voice firm despite the shock that shot through him. His hand instinctively went to his blaster, but he kept it lowered for the moment. The last thing they needed was to escalate the situation. The figure did not respond, but its gaze seemed to pierce through them, as if it could see into their very souls. It raised one long, metallic arm and pointed toward the far side of the chamber, where a pedestal sat, bathed in an eerie, pulsing light. Atop the pedestal was a small glowing object, an artifact. It was spherical in shape, covered in intricate patterns that shifted and changed as if they were alive. Alaric's heart skipped a beat. That's the artifact. The figure's arm slowly lowered, and it turned to face them fully, its movements precise, deliberate, almost mechanical. The air hummed louder now, the energy of the chamber pressing in on them. The silence had become deafening. It was as if the entire universe was holding its breath. Alaric didn't know what to make of it. This wasn't a typical retrieval job. There was nothing about this planet, this alien entity, or the artifact itself that made sense. Everything about this mission was wrong. He glanced at his crew, each of them looking as uneasy as he felt. "What do we do now?" Juno whispered. "We take the artifact." Alaric replied, his voice steady. "We do the job we came here for." But as he took a step forward, the figure suddenly moved. In a flash, it raised its arm again, and this time, a surge of energy shot out from its body. The blast slammed into the floor, sending a shockwave through the room that knocked them all off their feet. Alaric hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his body, but he barely had time to react before the figure lunged toward the artifact, its metallic fingers wrapping around the sphere. And then something even more terrifying happened. The walls of the chamber began to shift. The floor cracked open, and beneath them, a massive structure began to rise, revealing itself to be a vast, sprawling network of ancient machinery. It was as if the planet itself was waking up, activating from some deep slumber. "What the hell is going on?" Cale shouted, scrambling to his feet, his voice laced with fear. "We need to get out of here," Alaric shouted, his instincts kicking in. Now. The crew didn't need any more urging. They turned and bolted toward the exit, the sound of the ancient machinery clinging to life behind them. The figure didn't pursue, but Alaric knew they were running out of time. Something ancient, something powerful, had just been awakened, and it was clear that this artifact wasn't just a simple object. It was a key to something far more dangerous. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the walls trembled as if the entire ruin was alive, ready to crush them. They ran, their footsteps pounding against the stone as they made their way back toward the ship. The Tempest was their only hope now. But Alaric couldn't shake the feeling that they had unleashed something they couldn't contain, something that would change the galaxy forever. The Tempest shook violently as it raced through the atmosphere, the ship's engines roaring as the crew fought to regain control. Alaric sat in the captain's chair, hands tightly gripping the controls, his mind racing. The planet was falling apart beneath them. They could feel the tremors, hear the groaning of the ancient ruins, and see the terrifying sight of the massive structure rising from the depths of the planet's surface. The artifact they had come for was no longer a simple job. It had triggered something far worse. "Alaric, we can't outrun this," Juno shouted from the comm station. Her voice panicked. "The planet is destabilizing. The whole place is coming down on us." He didn't need her to tell him that. The readings on his console were enough to confirm the catastrophic failure of the planet's core. It was as if the artifact had set off a chain reaction that couldn't be stopped. "We can't leave it behind," Alaric snapped, his voice a mixture of frustration and urgency. "We need to get that thing off this planet before it's too late." "But it's not just the planet," Cale added from the navigation console. "The energy readings I saw, there's something happening in the core of this place. It's not just an artifact. It's part of something bigger, something dangerous." Alaric glanced back at the crew, each of them with a look of disbelief on their face. It was clear now. They had walked into something far more ancient and more powerful than they had ever imagined. Whatever the artifact was, it had triggered the awakening of a hidden, forgotten part of the galaxy's past. And that past was fighting back. The shaking worsened, and for a moment, it felt like the entire ship might break apart. Alaric fought to stabilize the Tempest, but every turn he made, every adjustment he tried, felt like they were being pulled further into the planet's chaos. He could see it in the faces of his crew. They were starting to panic, but they also knew the only way out was to face what had happened. "We need answers," Alaric said, his voice grim. "That artifact. It's not just a relic. It's something much more, and I'm willing to bet it's the key to whatever's happening down there." Ilara, her helmet off and sweat beading on her forehead, nodded in agreement. "Then what do we do now? We can't just keep flying blind. We have to figure out what we've unleashed." Alaric's gaze drifted to the display showing the interior of the ruins. The alien figure, now visible through their scanners, was still at the pedestal where the artifact had once been. But it wasn't just standing there. It was now actively manipulating the artifact, its body glowing with an energy that resonated with the very fabric of the ship's systems. It was drawing power, feeding off the energy of the planet. And now the Tempest. "We need to stop it," Alaric said with determination. "If it gets control of that artifact, it could destroy us all," Cale finished, his voice low and filled with dread. The ship's alarms began blaring, warning them of critical damage to their hull. Another tremor shook the Tempest, sending the crew scrambling for stability. It was clear that they had no choice but to return to the planet. "Set a course for the ruins," Alaric barked. "We have to stop this thing before it completely consumes everything." Juno hesitated for a moment before turning back to her station. "Are you sure about this, Captain? If we go back, there's no guarantee we'll make it out alive." Alaric looked at her, his jaw clenched. "We don't have a choice. The only way we're getting out of this is by ending it. We need that artifact, and we need to destroy whatever's controlling it before it consumes the entire galaxy." The crew rallied, their faces grim, but determined. They had faced impossible odds before, but this felt different. It was like the universe itself was conspiring against them. Yet, they knew what had to be done. The Tempest descended once again into the chaos of the planet's surface. As they approached the ruins, they could see it clearly now. The alien figure stood at the center of an enormous energy vortex, the artifact held high above its head. The ground beneath it had cracked open, and massive tendrils of energy surged out from the deep core of the planet, as though the entire world was alive, trying to break free. "We're not getting through this without a fight," Juno muttered, gripping her weapon tighter. "That thing looks like it's preparing for something big." Alaric nodded, his eyes fixed on the figure. The creature's energy seemed to be pulsing with every beat of its elongated limbs. Its eyes, those glowing, otherworldly eyes, seemed to be searching for something that only it could see. The Tempest hovered above the ruined city, now nothing more than a battlefield of destruction. As the crew disembarked, Alaric's boots hit the cracked surface with a sense of finality. The entire planet was dying, and the only way to survive was to face the unknown. The ruins had become a war zone. The figure below them moved with unnatural speed, a blur of glowing energy and metal. In a flash, it raised the artifact toward the sky, and a beam of raw power shot into the heavens, piercing the sky like a spear of lightning. It felt as if the entire planet was shaking in response. "We need to stop it," Alaric said again, his voice cold. "Get to the pedestal, take the artifact, and disable it. We don't know what it's going to do, but we're not giving it the chance to use it." As they ran toward the center of the ruins, the world around them seemed to bend and twist, warping under the power of the alien entity. The ground cracked open beneath their feet, sending them scrambling for footing as an explosion of energy blasted from the pedestal, sending waves of force that knocked them back. Cale, who had been monitoring the situation closely, shouted from behind, "It's trying to merge with the artifact. If it succeeds, the entire galaxy will be in its control. The energy levels are off the charts." Alaric didn't need to hear any more. The time for talking was over. The figure, now fully enveloped in energy, had begun to levitate, its form indistinct as it absorbed the artifact's power. The ship, the crew, the entire planet. They were nothing but pieces in its game. Without thinking, Alaric reached for his blaster and fired. A streak of energy flew toward the creature, but it dissipated before it could reach its target. The creature's form twisted and reformed, becoming more terrifying with every second. It was no longer just an alien figure. It was becoming something else entirely. And it was becoming far too powerful to stop. The tempest rocked violently as it hovered above the ruins, the planetary core beneath them trembling with every passing moment. Alaric's heart pounded in his chest, and his thoughts raced. The situation was spiraling out of control. The alien figure, once just a strange, enigmatic being, was now a godlike entity, its body consumed by the energy of the artifact. It had become the very embodiment of destruction, a creature of pure power, and it was only moments away from achieving its ultimate goal, merging with the artifact and gaining control over the entire galaxy. Alaric could feel the air thick with the intense hum of energy. His crew was scattered, firing their weapons in a futile attempt to stop the advancing being, but it was as if the figure was not just evading them. It was becoming one with the planet itself. The ground beneath them cracked open, releasing tendrils of molten rock and searing heat. It was clear this was the end of everything unless they stopped it now. Alaric. Juno's voice crackled through his comm. She was shouting, but he could barely make out her words over the deafening roar of the energy storm. We can't take much more of this. We need to get closer to the pedestal. The pedestal, the source of all this chaos, stood at the heart of the ruins. The artifact, now glowing brighter than ever, rested atop it, its patterns shifting and morphing in ways that defied logic. The alien figure was floating in midair, its eyes locked onto the artifact, its body pulsating with energy. It was as if it was one with the artifact now, feeding off its power, and Alaric knew they had to stop it before it could complete its transformation. Kel, can you override the artifact's energy flow? We need to disable it. Alaric shouted over the comms, his voice filled with urgency. Kel's response was clipped, his voice strained. I'm trying, but the energy is too much. It's like the artifact is alive. It's rejecting my attempts to access its systems. We need to get closer, but it's too dangerous. Alaric didn't hesitate. His instincts kicked in. I'll lead the way. We're going in now. He motioned for his crew to follow, and they all ran toward the pedestal. As they moved, the ground shook beneath them, and the very air felt like it was trying to tear them apart. The alien figure's form shimmered, its body more ethereal now than solid, as it absorbed more and more energy from the artifact. It was becoming something more than just a creature. It was becoming a force, a being of unimaginable power. The crew reached the center of the ruins, where the pedestal stood, and Alaric took a deep breath. It felt like they were walking into the maw of an ancient beast. The artifact's energy crackled in the air, and the walls around them pulsed with light. It was clear that the planet, the ruins, and everything around them was reacting to the presence of the artifact and the alien figure. They were in the eye of a storm, and there was no turning back. We need to move quickly. Juno shouted as she fired another round toward the figure, but it was as if the energy field around the creature absorbed the blasts. Nothing could touch it. Kale ran forward, his fingers flying over his tablet, trying to hack into the artifact's energy grid. But every time he made progress, the artifact seemed to fight back, throwing off waves of energy that forced him to retreat. We're running out of time. Kel yelled, sweat dripping down his face. The artifact's energy is reaching critical mass. It won't be long before it detonates, and if we're still here when it does, we won't let that happen. Alaric interrupted, his voice firm. We need to get that thing off its pedestal and out of here. With a sudden, sharp movement, the alien figure turned toward them, its eyes, glowing with fiery intensity, fixated on the crew. It seemed to sense their every move, as though it was aware of their intentions. The energy around it fluctuated, growing stronger with each passing moment. The ground shook harder, and pieces of debris fell from the surrounding ruins. adding to the chaos. Alaric's heart raced. He knew they had to act now. "Cover me," he said, his voice low and determined. He stepped forward, moving toward the pedestal, his blaster drawn. Every instinct in him screamed that they were walking into their doom, but he didn't care. The galaxy's fate was on the line, and if they didn't act now, everything would be lost. As Alaric moved closer to the pedestal, the alien figure let out an unearthly screech. It was as though the very fabric of reality was being torn apart by its voice. The light around it intensified, a blinding flash of raw power that threatened to consume everything in its path. "Alaric, no!" Juno screamed, her voice full of panic. "Get back."